Insight. Thank you for allowing us to come into your homes today. Before our program starts, I would recommend that you'll go to the telephone and call a friend or a family member because we're going to be talking about African Liberation Day. And my two guests that will be appearing on the program with me today have a lot of experience and knowledge about African liberation. So call a friend, call a family member, and we're going to deal with African liberation. But first of all, the beginning of African liberation, I guess, started when the first foreigners invaded Africa, and Africans took up the fight to liberate their land. We can go back to King Pianki of 753 BC to 713 BC. And he was one of our heroes then who had to go and unite Egypt. It was the upper and the lower Egypt. And one part of Egypt was occupied by Euro-Asians, or Asians at that time. So that is one of the first known facts of African liberation. Then we can go on, we can pick out at almost every turn of the centuries, from that time up until now, African people and African countries have fought for their liberation. What brings to my mind is 1896, Ethiopia defeated the Italians at the Battle of Adena. We could talk about the Basut defeated the British in 1852. And we can go on and on about the many revolutionary wars and liberations at home, meaning on the continent and in these Western hemispheres. Many Africans had fought the slave masters when they began to take out people from the shores, and they stopped them there. Pan-Africanists, the first Pan-Africanist, Edward W. Blyden, outspoken advocate of Pan-Africanism, you understand, 1832. But I think most importantly, that it wasn't until the 1900s, 1920 to be exact, that African liberation took on a universal platform. It became international. Through the works and hopes of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and his organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. And why I emphasized Garvey at that particular time was because in 1920, the red, black, and green was introduced to the world through the UNIA convention, the International Convention. And this red, black, and green flag, red for the blood that have to be spread. Black is for the race, and green is for the green lands of Africa and beyond, was the colors and the flags around African liberation. It was at that particular cry that Garvey had went to the world, at that time the League of Nations, and demanded that Europe get out of Africa, that Europe and Asia get out of Africa. In fact, it was there he said Europe for the Europeans, Asia for the Asiatics, and by all means Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad. But we come up to this era here now in the 90s, but we have to look back at when African liberation here in this country became a greater focal point. And I must dare say so was at the time that Ghana got her liberation, and that was 1957. Because as you know, Oseguefo Kwame Nkrumah, being the Prime Minister of Ghana, and many Africans here in America beginning to learn and understand that, hey, at last, one of our countries are being free outside of the ones that was under colonial rule. So today we are going to talk about that, and we also are going to talk about the people that have and the people that are making African liberation a reality. Everyday work, they live their lives fighting and struggling for the true liberation of say, Africa. So without any further ado, let me say in our traditional sense, we say welcome, Aquaba to Insight. First of all, let me go to my left, and I know this face is not a stranger to Insight. Let me invite my brother Ya Yambo of the ARP, Aquaba to Insight.
Thank you.
And my brother Sainey Faye, also of the ARP. We say Aquaba to Insight. Let's begin. African liberation. Tell me about it.
Well, our people, since colonialism and during colonialism, understood that the most important thing to us as a people must be to fight for our liberation and our freedom. Here, we understood also that we need to have a scientific method, a scientific plan to order to incite the masses of our people to see the necessity to take part in this liberation struggle. So Dr. Osasifo, Kwame Nkrumah, in 1957, as you said, Ghana became independent. In 1958, Kwame Nkrumah decided that we need to host Africa Freedom Day.
Okay.
This day here will be used for Africans all over the world and other freedom-loving people who was non-African to come to Ghana to put their position before the world.
Right.
And what was going on with them. As Malcolm said, more so like the Bandung Conference.
Yes.
You know.
Right.
And to let the people know what they were struggling for, what they were struggling against, who was our friends, who was our enemies. Also to give us a territory that we could train ourselves for guerrilla warfare. Because here we were serious about our liberation, because at this time in 1957, we didn't have 8 independent African states in Africa.
Right.
You know.
Right.
And even some of those states was neo-colonialist states.
True.
But so our people decided that we need to continue to fight for our liberation. And in 1963, at the Open Conference at the Organization of African Unity in Ethiopia in Addis Ababa in 1963, they decided to take Africa Freedom Day and change it to Africa Liberation Day and change it from April 15th to May 25th. And our people have been struggling and demonstrating and hosting and organizing African Liberation Day all over the world ever since, to use as a method to organize our people to free our land, Africa, and our people, Africans.
So it was African Freedom Day was April 15th?
Yes.
Okay.
1958.
Okay.
Originally, just like you said, the conference was called African People's Conference was called in Ghana.
Yes.
And when this was called in Ghana, by 1958, there were only 8 independent African states on the whole continent of Africa. Just like you said, and these were Egypt, Ethiopia,
right,
Libya, Sudan,
right,
Ghana, etc. And these people decided that Africa needs to be liberated. You know, and the liberation of Africa cannot be done only by them. It has to be done worldwide. So here comes the Pan-Africanistic aspect of it.
Right.
There were thousands of attendants, thousands of people that came from different parts.
Okay.
There were over 21 liberation movements that came.
Okay.
So here the Africans were able to set up an agenda that you need to liberate yourself. What do you need to liberate yourself from?
2 questions. Right?
Right.
Okay.
1, you need political independence.
Right.
2, you need economic independence. But how do you get political independence followed by economic independence? You get it through organization.
Okay.
And how do you organize? Because colonialism by the time in Africa was partitioned, as you know, in 1884, in 1885, at the Berlin Conference.
Berlin, right.
The French had their side, the British had their side, Belgium had their side.
Everybody
had a piece of their pie.
Right.
So how do you organize Africans to be able to get the yoke of colonialism and take on their own destiny? This regarded organization.
Right.
And if this was the spearhead of African Liberation Day. From 58 on, between 58 and 63, there were 31 independent African states.
58 to okay.
Between 1958 and 1963,
okay,
31 independent African states on the continent.
Okay. All right.
And most of the liberation movements were really fighting to gain ground. So now they decided to form the OAU in 1963. And it was at the OAU conference that they decided that we need what is called African Liberation Day, because the liberation movement had to push them that this is not only African freedom, we have to liberate yourself.
Right.
So it was changed from African Freedom Day to African Liberation Day, and it has been celebrated at the end of May, usually on the 25th of May.
Right. Now, thank you for that information, first of all, Brother Sainey, because that was very, very important about the dates and whatnot. But during that time, there were several figures on the continent, young men that was called the, what we used to call them? We used to call them the young lions. And that was Osei Kwame Nkrumah. The other one was from the Congo. Patrice Lumumba. Sekou Touré. Okay. Right. But Jomo, right? Jomo was considered part of the old school, but he was part of the young church. And why I mentioned that, because I just wanted to draw that out, that it was the younger generation of Africans that really was pushing for a African liberation or a OAU type of stance, whereas that the world had to recognize and to realize that we had to get our freedom, our total liberation.
Actually, Kwame Nkrumah had been the spearhead, one of the most prominent Pan-Africanists the African continent has ever seen.
True.
And Kwame Nkrumah had independence in Ghana in 1957.
Right.
And when he proclaimed independence, he said distinctly that the independence of Ghana was meaningless unless the whole total liberation of Africa is assured.
Right.
Kwame Nkrumah had been influenced by Garvey and by W.E. Du Bois.
Right.
Du Bois, as people might know, has been one of the founders of the NAACP in the United States.
Right.
He later on went to Ghana and died in Ghana.
Right.
George Padmore was very influential to Kwame Nkrumah. So we do find that we have people like Sylvester Williams, Pan-Africanists, have been very influential to Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah had been the spearhead of this African Freedom Day, which culminated to African Liberation Day. So that Africans, like every other people, must have a day in which they must be able to celebrate, and then see what they have done for themselves and how they can chart the future of the African continent. Because here, he saw a paradox. Africa was one of the richest continents, if not the richest continent in the world. But Africans were poor, they were powerless, they were disorganized. He found that with the rest of the Pan-Africanists that, something was wrong. We needed unity, and with unity you have organization. Without this, you can't achieve anything.
How far have we came from that day in the areas that we have talked about, in unity, and first of all, in liberation? Is Africa free?
Well, you know, Kwame Nkrumah told us to say, it's not the height in which we are rich, but from the depth in which we have came.
Okay.
So here we have to come and look at the progress that we as African people have made, even since 1958, from the first African Freedom Day.
Okay.
As Brother Sainey said, in 1963, at the time we had 31 African states.
Yes.
So we can see that our people took on a movement of liberation and freeing our land and freeing our people. We understand that also when some of these movements took place and took power and ran the colonialists out of Africa directly, we were organized from a social aspect, so capitalism remained there, imperialism remained there, and we came up with neo-colonialists.
True.
So we understand that now we're struggling to organize ourselves, to rid ourselves of these puppets in Africa, where our land and our resources can be returned back into the hands of our people, where we can make proper decisions to use our resources for ourselves, no matter we live on the continent or live off the continent. That we as a people must have say so about our lives. And we understand that people who do not have understanding about their lives would not come to discuss their lives, won't even see their lives as important. So here we understand the need to be politically educated. So we understand that before we can be free economically, even free culturally, even free spiritually, first, as Kwame Nkrumah said, seek your political kingdom. Because if you don't control your politics, then you don't control your economics, you don't control your social life, you don't control your religious life, and you surely don't control your culture, where we have to fight so hard every day against imperialism to live our culture, to practice our culture. And I know other religions, people other than Christians, know what they talk about when they talk about it here for America. So we say that we look at this height in which we have reached, even inside this country, about the movements and continued struggle of our people, even in this country, that we have made great achievement. Even just to be here on this show, Insight, show that the depths from which we have came, that we have got to a higher level. And not only that, that now the program can be used even to put our people on a higher level. So we see that the struggle is not over, but we continue to fight every day. And as Kwame Ture, we should fight to our death.
Yes. Another point I just want to add is just like you say, Africa is not free and it's not united. Africans are not free and they are not united, because we have to remember that, you know, Africa's case, we came through triple exploitation. In other words,
yes,
after slavery, we had to go through what's called colonialism. When slavery ended, in the latter part of the 18th and 19th, and the latter part of the 19th century, say around 1865 on,
right,
20 years after 1865, by 1884 to 1885, the Berlin Conference carved up Africa. And here, the whole formula changes from slavery to colonialism. In slavery, you do not need anything to justify. All you need is brute force to make the person work for you. There's no need for everything. But in colonialism, which is an other state, in colonialism, you leave the Africans where they are. Leave them on their continent, not necessarily you don't have to put them anywhere. They will produce for you, because you do not need manpower no more to do anything.
True.
Slavery did not end because people thought that it was a bad thing. Slavery ended because it was uneconomical and the Africans couldn't accept it no more, because there were revolts everywhere in the diaspora.
Yes.
In 113 countries, Africans have been dispersed in the world.
yes,
And everywhere they went, they fought. But with colonialism, between 1884 and 1885, colonialism went on right up to 1957 on the continent.
Yes.
Just like we were saying. With Ghana's independence, now the whole formula changes again. Now, colonialism, you take the products out of Africa, bring it to Europe, and America built Europe, and America, we built Europe.
yes,
Africa built Europe.
yes,
So whilst Europe was developing, Africa was underdeveloping.
Underdeveloped.
That is colonialism.
yeah,
It took on from 1884 up to the latter part of the 1960s. Then they gave the Africans independence, so-called. This independence, that is the third stage, which is neo-colonialism.
right,
That is to say, what Nkrumah would call independent de jure, but dependent de facto.
okay.
In other words, that means to say you can change your name, have a national anthem, have a flag,
right,
but economically and politically you have no power.
power.
What sense does it make, for example, Nkrumah used to say, to post a letter from Ghana, it was quicker. When you post a letter from Ghana to Lagos, it will take months. But when you post a letter from Ghana to London, it will take few days. Matter of fact, not only that, if you want to call somebody from Ghana to Lagos, you have to go through London. If you want to call somebody from Abidjan to Dakar, Senegal, you have to go through France. If you have to call somebody from Lisbon, from Guinea-Bissau to Mozambique, you have to go through Lisbon. So and so and so and so.
True.
So this was the era of colonialism, which was turning into neocolonialism. But Africans had the flag, they had everything, they had the resources, but they had no power. And here comes in neocolonialism. Neocolonialism is the economic part of it. You will have political independence. You think you do.
Yes.
You have African leaders,
Okay.
you have African police, you have African judiciary,
Okay.
but you have no power.
Right.
So you do find that the resources that Africa had was still maintained and exploited from outside.
Right.
Africa had the resources, they had the minerals, the diamonds, the gold, everything, but they still poor.
Right.
So this was the form of neocolonialism, and Africans needed to be liberated from this form of colonialism. That's why African unity and a continental unity was the byproduct of African Freedom Day and African Liberation Day. That was the only solution that Africans could have.
Well, thanks for that, Al. And to add to that is that even when Africans were getting their so-called countries and their police force and their governments, many of their leaders was being taught by colonialists. Okay, so all they was doing was that they was just changing the face. The same oppression, same tyranny, same injustice. Okay, a thief is a thief. Okay.
You'll be going back to the store, huh?
That was the main problem they had, because you will find that you come with the same question of identity here again. Because when you confuse your subject, he identifies more with you than he identifies with himself. For example, during the 60s, after the OAU was formed in 1963, the African countries that were colonized by the European countries refused to break up from their colonial masters.
That's right.
France made sure that he created an organization called OCAM. OCAM was formed by France for its ex-colonies. They have to still deal with France, buy the exports from France, everything through France. The British created the Commonwealth. That's why you hear the British Commonwealth. It used to be called the British Empire.
Yes.
It was later on christened to the Commonwealth. And Africans used to make fun. Where's the wealth? Come on. And then you had what was called the Lusophone. This was done by the Portuguese. The Portuguese didn't have too many colonies, but the few that they had, they were the most repressive people that ever existed. That's why all the African countries that were colonized by the Portuguese had to take up arms to fight.
Fight. I mean, serious fight.
Yes.
Mozambique,
Angola,
yes,
and Guinea-Bissau. Serious fights.
Yes.
Because the Portuguese, unlike the other Europeans, did not believe in self-rule and stuff like that. They're so anyway, this was how this was set up. So you find that once you have independence and you have people relating to their ex-masters, it becomes harder to form African unity. No wonder they couldn't even have a common market.
Right.
Senegal had the same product with Gambia and Guinea-Bissau and Mali.
Right.
When they go to the world market, Senegal speaks on the side of France. Mali speaks on the side of France. Gambia speaks on the side of Britain.
Right.
And then, let's say Guinea-Bissau will speak on the side of Portugal. And they are all on the same continent. Who is the beneficiary here? There is no independence.
Nobody's speaking for the benefit of
Africans. So here comes the confusion. Then worldwide, the Africans on the continent too, that's what you call micronationalism. They know they're Africans on the continent, but they identify more with their microstates than they do with the nation of Africa.
Yes, sir.
So then the Africans in the diaspora are even still more confused. In the United States, in Brazil, they call them Afro-Americans,
right.
Afro-Brazilians,
right.
Jamaicans,
right.
North Indians,
right. Trinidadians.
Okay, this is how the confusion of identity. I mean, proliferated not only in Africa but in the diaspora too.
Yes.
Right. Because if Africa is weak and Africans outside on the continent in over 113 countries can see that Africa is not to be identified because people don't like to identify it with something that is negative. Africa has never been portrayed positively in the Western Hemisphere. Everything we know about Africa is negative.
Right.
And God knows that Africa gives most of everything to mankind. History will tell you.
Yeah. You know, by you just saying that brings to mind, and I do not intend to make fun of anybody being killed or being bombed, but just the other day, the NATO and the United States was accused of bombing the building belonging to the Chinese embassy. Okay. And China got on the horn. The United States had to do what? Send an apology to China. What I'm trying to point out is that because China is a nation, is a country that one must deal with, that even though that it was a accident, quote unquote, or whatever the case may be, they had to respond to that country in a very positive way. How many Africans are killed in the same way? And
not only that, we look at America, imperialists, and they went to Somalia and dropped bombs, you understand?
Thank you.
Looking for someone else.
Thank you.
And none of these Africans, even ministers, raised their voice about it. You understand? Even the Africans try to applaud the U.S. bombing Africa.
Yes.
You know, how can an African applaud someone bombing their mom? But we have those types of things going on, so it shows that we don't have no power when we ask questions, is Africa free? We wouldn't even have to ask the question, is Africa free?
And even the case of the bombing that you're talking about, to a larger picture even, you would see the role of Europe, NATO, with Kosovo and elsewhere in Serbia. Internationally, everybody sympathizes with people that are victims of war.
Yes.
But people see an even-handedness here. Here is Europe at war.
Right.
And you see how it's drummed up? Liberia has been on. Sierra Leone, the fire is still on. In Angola and in Mozambique, people are dying by the hundreds of thousands.
Yes.
Nobody even say anything about that. This is not a matter of Europe alone. This is a global thing.
I know.
But the reason why it hasn't been done is what? It's because Africans worldwide lack the power to be able to effect change.
Well, we have to spread that because, we have to be able to change that. And both of you, Mr. Brothers, have spent many years in organizations. And I think that's one of the things that I want to come down to because, our friend, our mentor, Kwame Ture, have always mentioned about joining organizations.
That's right.
Lighting organizations. I remember when I had met with him back in the 60s. He had belonged to one organization. I was with the UNIA. And then when he moved from SNCC, and went into the African Nationalist field, he had always talked about organizing, people join organizations. I think the lack of our people today of joining bona fide organizations to fight for their freedom and for their liberation is one of the main problems that we have today in passing out information. Would you agree to that?
Yes, but you absolutely correct. Kwame used to say the same thing Nkrumah and Sekou used to say. And Gabe himself used to put that out there. We can't do anything without organization. History has shown that in our struggle, most of what we have ever earned was earned through organization. And when you look at all the historical developments in world civilization, people have always struggled. Not only Africa,
Right.
but in Europe,
Right.
in Asia, in Latin America, all around the world, people struggle and they are based on organization. But for us, the problem arises is because we have so much of what Du Bois used to say, I mean, the Confucianist method in which we have been put through for too long. Brainwashing and identity. Like Kwame says, identity crisis is our main thing. Because if we believe that we don't belong, we won't believe that we belong to an organization. We as Africans, if you put us in a room, the brother used to make a fun of that. You put 10 of us in a room. You ask each of us, what are you? He might tell me, I'm African American, I'm Negro, I'm Nigger, I'm colored, I'm a West Indian, I'm a Jamaican, I'm a Gambian, I'm a Brazilian. So, yes. And you can put the same Asians, let's say Mongoloids, Chinese in the same room and call them each one, what are you? You will have only one answer. That they are Chinese. Here, our oppression, you might think, would be so much that anybody can be confused of his identity but us. Because we are distinct.
Right, we are.
You cannot confuse us with our race is a distinct race. So that when you call yourself whatever you are not, you are already, I mean, putting up the idea of separation. And this has been our own problem. The continent cannot be unified because we tend to see itself different from each other. And then the Africans in the diaspora would compound the problem more. If you ask an African born here to go to Azania right now, Azania needs an engineer and he doesn't have a job here, ask him to go to Azania and get him a job. The first thing, if he's confused about identity, he'll tell you, I'm not an African. And when he works in Azania, you go to Azania, work in Azania today, if you don't open up your mouth, nobody wants to know whether you were born in Brooklyn, New York, because you look African. True. African cannot be confused from any other nationality or race.
That's true. And it's a universal, it's a universal happening to us because no matter where we go, we are always discriminated against on how we look. First of all, okay, as soon as you walk in that door, whether you're wearing a entama or a three-piece suit or a two-piece suit, you are going to be subject to the same type of discrimination and hatred. So we have to understand that. One other thing too is, like you mentioned before, about the African, not really. That also spreads over into other parts of the world because I remember when the Caribbean islands started vying for their independence, they ran through the same problem. Some was under the French, some was under the British, some was under the Spanish, and they was having problems breaking away from that colonial strength. See, and because of that, probably blocked them from really, unifying as one big, complete commonwealth if they wanted to. But now, the question I'm going to ask is, what about the education? They, as you know, in the last 20, 25 years in this country, we have been able to turn education at least around so that we have African history in our education nowadays. We have been able to touch on it to a degree where some of us are looking at our education, history, whatever, whatnot, through African eyes. Do you think that same suggestion and idea and learning should be dealt with on the continent?
First of all, we know that Dr. Du Bois was struggling real hard before his death to write African Encyclopedia.
Right.
Because once we start to talk about African history, then first of all, we have to write our history before we can start talking about our history. We have to define what is our history.
Okay.
Versus what have been told as our history. We we also, when we start dealing with our history, then is we gonna deal with our history from a free people, or we gonna start our history off from a slave? And when we look inside this country, and we see the confusion, as Brother Sainey said, even dealing with the question of identity of who we are, so that we know that this capitalist racist imperialist system of America is not gonna never teach us our history, first of all, and none of their institutions. Even with the ones here in the Atlanta area, at the Atlanta colleges here, the Atlanta complex up there, it's not gonna teach African history, because if you did, you will see many more markers, garbage coming up out of there, you understand? You will see some faint little hammer coming out of there, you understand?
Right.
But instead, you don't see that vigorous thing coming out of there and dealing with African history from a revolutionary perspective. Because if you did, then you will see our youth, our students, struggling real hard to educate, to organize our people throughout the world, because our organization functions on the college campus, because we said students come to the university from all over the world, every crook and cranny, from every city, from every hamlet, from every village. And then we can organize those into our organization. Once they go back, they can start organizing our people on a fast, on a mass scale.
Okay.
All right? So we know that this education of the system of America, and we look at the University of Georgia, so to say, we know ain't no Martin Luther King finna come up out of there. All right? So when you start talking about teaching education in the schools, then in what schools and what education you gonna teach? I know at Fort Valley State, they don't deal with no book taking you back to Africa, dealing with Africa. They're dealing with stuff that happened in the U.S., stuff that happened to Africans in the U.S.
Right. But go ahead.
John, African history is very, very essential. Kwame Nkrumah himself says in consensus that the history of Africa cannot be written as history of European adventures. It must be written as our own history. And St. Anthony says that history is a weapon in our struggle. If you do not know your history, you are, all saying goes, you are bound to repeat so many things. And African history is so rich that it's distorted on the continent. The African curriculum of history on the continent is not very much different from what is actually taught in the diaspora. They teach you the history of England. This is done through Cambridge and Oxford. All these European universities pass the same curriculum to African universities on the continent. So that it is not very surprising for you to begin with, to work on the continent of Africa to begin with. It just shows how identity is. You meet a brother, you say, where are you from? You say, what do you mean, where are you from? You ask me where I was born or where are you from? Because you could hear it. And these are intellectual circles. Most of what you know is being internalized by what you've been taught. You see, and we reflect that kind of stuff. African intellectuals sit around, even in not in the college campuses, but even around the circles, asking each other, where are you from? I'm from Ghana, I'm from Nigeria, I'm from Gambia, I'm from Sierra Leone. And here the same thing too. You hear Africans too walk around here. Where are you from? I'm from Memphis, I'm from Tennessee, I'm from Mississippi, I'm from DC. These are the terminology you use determines your consciousness. You, instead of asking me where I was born, you ask me where I'm from. What do you mean where I'm from? When we came here in 1619, this country had less than the population of Lagos.
Yes.
Within 300 years, we transformed an agrarian nation to be the most industrialized nation in modern history.
And you have more Africans here than you have Europeans.
Absolutely. Europeans were indentured servants over here too.
Right.
But these are historical things that Africans have to know.
So when you asked a question about education, so from what perspective you asking this question, in the sense of we as Africans set up our own institutions, start teaching our own history from our own African authors, in particular, in truth, in particular, and if so, then this is going to have to take place somewhere. It's something that we're going to have to do, because we can't be talking about the institutions ran by capitalists of America. That we done had teachers on the college campus in this party that have lost their jobs for being fired because they say you're teaching socialism, you're teaching Pan-Africanism. And today we know you can't look at Westwood dictionary and ain't find the word Pan-Africanism. It's been around 99 years. So what's up with that?
Well, yes, that's so true, but that's more the reason why I say that, and I'm going to tell you the reason why I'm saying it is because just as our African history has been able to enlighten the masses of our people, okay, not through the universities.
That's right.
I'm talking about. I'll give you one good example. Let's take Garvey. All right. It wasn't until Africans started writing about Garvey that the words started coming out. As long as Europeans was writing about him, they was giving it they was doing a negative version of it.
Yes,
But it wasn't until J.A. Rogers was writing about history, okay. Other people was writing about Garvey. Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Tony Martin, who got his degree, his PhD in Garvey. Okay. Many of the unsung teachers and educators that was teaching African history or black history, okay, that a generation of people came up that began to start leaning towards. We got a call coming in. Aquaba to Insight. Aquaba.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I have a question to ask you. I've been trying to find out. I used to study Christianity. Then I started graduating from it. The more I started learning about black folks, the farther I found out that a black man himself, I truly believe that we don't really have a religion. I believe we're so close to God. I believe that we really was. When the books say that the devil had followers, the devil cast the earth, he had many followers. Could that be the black people that when they were cast in Africa? Do you think that could be that way right now?
The question is that when we was cast out of Africa.
No, the Bible says you were placed in the garden.
Oh, okay, yes.
And we was ran out the garden, and we just never bred everybody else.
Right.
Every other race come from you.
Okay.
So therefore, we must have known something like magic. We had, magic. I believe that was missing out of the King James version. That's why I believe they didn't want us to learn how to read and learn, because words are very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
You read that book and say that the word became flesh and
Mm-hmm.
dwelled among you. God said, "Let us make man." And the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And if you read in John 10:34, he said what Jesus said. He said that he told the people that ye are gods. If I call you God, how can I break my own father's law? You know what I'm saying?
So your question is?
I just want to make a little statement this talk,
Okay.
because I something so strange. I'm just being real greedy, man. I just want to learn about black folks myself.
Okay.
Until I know we're special people. But I truly believe this. I believe whatever punishment or spell we were cast upon us, I believe we did something so wicked in the beginning.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, you take it easy.
All right. Before we comment on that, we have another call coming in. Aquaba to Insight.
Hi. I'd like to kind of know if you and your guests have a suggestion as to how families and children can kind of get involved in the process of learning more about our African history.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Go ahead, yeah.
Yes. Come to African Liberation Day and come and join our organization. We need you in our organization to come help organize our people, and also we have a women's wing inside our organization. Matter of fact, the theme this year for African Liberation Day is Arm Yourself to Revolutionary Ideology and Organization. And also inside of our party we have the YPI, the Young Pioneer Institute, where the youth of the party members children belong to. So we need you, and come and see, can you work with our organization? And if you feel you can't, then we will suggest that you come and work with some other organization, because you need to be in some organization, you and your youth working for your people. And then you will truly understand the love that you really have for your people. And then when somebody asks you, do you love your people, you can always raise your hand.
Thank you. All right, we have another call coming. Thank you. We will give out the information about African Liberation Day in a minute. Yes, Aquaba to Insight. Welcome to Insight. Hello? Hello? Do we still have the caller?
Yes.
Okay.
My name is Jabu Sitole.
Yes?
I'm from South Africa. I'm a student at Black Atlanta. I would like to know what are the, or what is the practical program you have so that one can key in terms of understanding properly, the history, like you're explaining about the conference and Walden Crew, what took place and so on. Secondly, in order to do something about organizing the people. I know that here in Atlanta there is an effort to set up an organization like AGA, for instance. So what are the practical programs you have that one can join into in order to spread, to take higher the effort you're involved in around organizing, around education, and so on? Thank you.
Okay, I think first of all, I'm going to let my guest answer in a second or so. Come around African Liberation Day, it's May 29th. Where's it at?
On Saturday, Mosley Park.
Mosley Park.
The first part of it, the International Symposium, going to start at 10 to 1 at the Hickman Student Center on Marshbound campus. That's 715 Martin Luther King Drive. Second part going to be from 3 to 8 p.m. at Mosley Park. That's 1655 Martin Luther King Drive.
Okay, and then also you have the African Research Center on what is it, Auburn. That is a building that holds a lot of information that you can read about. You can read about Marcus Garvey. You can read about say you go Kwame Nkrumah. You can read about the whole African liberation movement of 50, 60, 100 years ago. We